On today's show, Cavs president of basketball operations, Koby Altman, and head coach Kenny Atkinson are going to meet with the media today. There are a number of things that we should want to learn from those two. I'll tell you what those are and how I think they'll be answered next on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name's Danny Cunningham, and you might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. And I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure to drop us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and of course, be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube as we get started here, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, because right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5. And if your first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today. On Tuesday, Kenny Atkinson and Koby Altman will both be meeting with the media as part of their media day obligations. I guess we will call it media day for the Cavs as a whole. Will be on Monday of next week, but similar to last year, Koby and Kenny are having their preseason availabilities before media day gets there. I think it's mostly because the team will be going next Monday down to Bradenton, Florida for training camp. And if they can shorten Monday a little bit by having this preseason availability for Kenny and Koby, it does make that day a little bit easier on their end. So I understand it from that point of view. I don't know if there's any specific reason why Tuesday is the day that was picked, but here we are. So they will be speaking today. Of course, there are a number of things that we will learn from this press conference on Tuesday morning. I will have you covered afterwards right here at Locked On Cavs. We'll likely have Wednesday's show up. We'll call it Wednesday's show late Tuesday afternoon with a pretty immediate reaction to what they say at Cleveland Clinic Courts. But there are a number of things that they will be asked. And I think there are a few things that are the most interesting or among the most interesting things that they can answer. And I think that this conversation with them needs to start with the health of a couple of guys, because Darius Garland was very obviously not himself during the postseason last year against the Indiana Pacers. As we know, he had an offseason foot surgery that could cost him the start of this season. Whether or not it does cost him the start of the season, we don't know as of right now. When the Cavs put out the timeline they put out, there's a chance that he's back for the start. I think Tuesday we'll get a little bit more clarity on that. I don't expect the Cavs to completely and totally tip their hand here, because they do often try and speak, as most front offices and coaching staffs do. They try and speak in generalities and not give away too much. And I don't think that they want to put pressure on the situation, because the reality is, even if things are trending very well for Garland right now, which they might be, I don't have a ton of information on that situation right now. But I do look at it and say, well, things can always change between now and 1 month from yesterday when the Cavs open up the season in New York. So you don't want to put pressure on that situation. But I think getting some clarity into what the expected timelines are, a little bit more than just the press release that was put out for both Max Strus and Darius Garland, is going to be an important part of Tuesday morning when those guys are asked about things. And I think the Garland situation is one that is a little bit more interesting, because as his surgery, one, obviously happened long before Max Strus's did. His injury happened long before Max Strus's did. So I do think it's fair to expect him to be back sooner than later. And with Strus's injury, there was such a long projection out into the season. I know the projection was technically lesser than what Darius Garland's was on his return to play from surgery, but because of the timing of it, Strus is in all likelihood going to miss much more time than Darius Garland. So I think that the Darius Garland situation, as far as where he is at, how close he is to being back on the floor, what his summer rehab process has been like, will be an interesting thing to hear what those guys have to say on it. And off of that, I think one of the other interesting things, and I would not expect a firm answer from Kenny Atkinson on this on Tuesday, but one of the other interesting questions is going to be, well, what does the starting lineup look like? And I know that I've talked about this a bit, and I will talk about it a little bit later this week. I'm going to have Greg Swartz from Bleacher Report come on the show, and we're going to talk starting lineup just a little bit. I wouldn't expect a firm answer here, but I do think that we might get some insight into which way Kenny Atkinson wants to play things with the starting lineup, because we know while Darius Garland conceivably could play opening night, I'm not going to rule that out. Maybe tomorrow it gets ruled out, or excuse me, today it gets ruled out, but I'm not going to rule that out right now. Max Strus is not playing opening night. That can be ruled out right now. Do they want to put DeAndre Hunter in the starting lineup? Are they comfortable doing that? I think they should be. I think that is the proper way to go, but I'm not sure where they stand on things right now. And I do think it would be fair to go through at least part of training camp before cementing that in, before putting that in stone. I think that'd be fair, but I also look at it and say, well, DeAndre Hunter is the right fit. He is the best player available for the Cavs to start that fits there. And ultimately, that's the best way for when Darius does get back to have the 5 best players on the floor. And one of the other things that I'm very interested in is how much does Darius Garland's potential absence from the starting lineup, and maybe this isn't a today thing, but how much does Darius Garland's potential absence from the starting lineup impact what they want to do at the starting small forward spot? Because while I do think that there are easy answers to both of those questions, to who should start at guard alongside Donovan Mitchell and who should start at small forward, I think those questions, the easy answers to them are in a vacuum, and basketball is played on hardwood and not in a vacuum. So I think that you need to kind of look at those things just a little bit differently than you would if everyone else around those two spots were healthy. So those are two of the things that I think are going to be asked very early on, because the injuries have already started to shape a little bit of what this season looks like, right? Because we know the Cavs are not going to be fully healthy at the start of the season. They're ultimately not going to be fully healthy for quite a while into the season. And to be fair to them, and I do wonder too, how much last year's experience of not having Max Strus at the start of the season is going to be something that they can look back at. And naturally, this team is not the exact same as last year. This is a team that did have a little bit of roster turnover, not a ton of roster turnover, but a little bit of roster turnover with guys like Isaac Okoro and Ty Jerome gone. And last year at this time, they had the same exact roster, maybe not same exact, because they had a couple of guys like, a Marcus Morris who was on the postseason roster that year before, but they had the same core of players. And this year they have a rotation that is just on the surface going to be at least a little bit different than it was the year before. They didn't have that. They had a different head coach. They had a different coaching staff, but the pieces this year that are actually going to play at the start of the season are different. So I will wonder, how much are they going to look back on what they were able to do last year without Max Strus? Because it is worth bringing up that last year when Max Strus was not available to start the season because of a nasty ankle sprain, Dean Wade started for a good chunk. I believe he had 21 starts at small forward before Max Strus was back. Isaac Okoro started 17 games before Max Strus was back. Those things matter. And I just look at that and say, okay, well, maybe they do want to just fall back because they know the Dean Wade at small forward can work. It's not as good as having DeAndre Hunter at small forward. The numbers bear that out, but they've been there before. They can be comfortable with that. He's got much more starting experience alongside the rest of that group than DeAndre Hunter does. I think that is, while true, something that the Cavs should ultimately look to change. And those are just two of the many things I'm very interested to hear about from Koby Altman and Kenny Atkinson. And since some time has passed, I do think it's appropriate to ask about the playoffs that were, and how much, considering what we just got done talking about with Darius Garland, how much did the injuries impact them, and how much did that push them to make themselves a little bit different this offseason? We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show brought to you by Monarch Money. Did you know that most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth? Could you imagine that? Most people can't. And whether it's 401ks, properties, investments, you might not have the full picture. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And leaving money on the table is something that absolutely nobody wants to do. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy to use interface you can use on your laptop or, like me, on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. And if you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you, where you can link all your accounts in minutes. Very quick, very simple, very easy. And you can see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel like you're in control of your money without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. No one wants to do that. Why would you? You can have Monarch take care of it. So don't let this financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA, that is LOCKEDONNBA, at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. Again, that's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Again, that is LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for half off your first year. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. And like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. And one of the things I am fascinated to learn, and I don't know how good of an answer this is going to get, but I am fascinated to learn how much did the postseason experience the Cavs had last season shape the moves they made this offseason. To recap what they did this offseason, they drafted Tyrese Proctor, which I don't think is going to necessarily have the biggest impact on this season. And I don't think was necessarily shaped by anything that happened in the postseason. I think it's a good pick, but a second round pick, you can't expect to come into a 64-win team and make a big impact. But I do think Tyrese Proctor has a place on this team. I think he has a place in the NBA, and I think he will have a future role with the Cavs. They traded Isaac Okoro for Lonzo Ball. They re-signed Sam Merrill to a 4-year contract, and they signed Larry Nance Jr. to a minimum contract. And I look at those moves, and I know I've talked about this quite a bit on the show throughout the summer, but I look at those moves as a direct reflection of what happened in the postseason against the Pacers. And the Cavs lost that series for a couple of different reasons. One of them, the injuries. Right? I mean, Darius Garland was severely hampered. DeAndre Hunter, not himself. Evan Mobley, not himself. Donovan Mitchell, not himself. And the Cavs also got outplayed. Like, I think it's very important to say that last part out loud. The Cavs got significantly outplayed in that series. But the injuries played a factor in it. But I also look at it and say, well, the Cavs were in a spot where they were in that spot in part because they didn't have enough guys that could play both ways. They did not have enough guys that were offensive players and defensive players. Ty Jerome, who had an abysmal series against the Pacers, had a very, very good year for the Cavs offensively. Not a good defender. Against the Pacers, he was awful offensively and his normal self defensively, which is not good. Isaac Okoro, maybe they could have played him more in that series. A good defender, certainly no doubt about that. No one will argue that. But on the offensive end of the floor, somebody that opponents are not going to spend a lot of time defending. They're not going to spend a lot of time guarding Isaac Okoro. They don't have that anymore. And I wonder how much of that was shaped by not only what happened against the Pacers, but also the way that Oklahoma City is built. Because teams, when they get eliminated, will struggle to turn on the TV sometimes and watch the rest of the postseason, but they know what happens. They know how Oklahoma City is built. They know what the Thunder look like. They know that Oklahoma City doesn't really have anyone you can play off the floor. And last year, the Indiana Pacers didn't really have anyone you could play off the floor. One of the fatal flaws for the Cavs was that they had multiple guys in their postseason rotation that you could play off the floor. Ty Jerome was one of them. Isaac Okoro was one of them. When Darius Garland is as hurt as he was, he becomes one of them. Now, if Darius Garland is healthy, he obviously provides you more than enough offensively to the point you cannot play him off the floor. But I think that a lot of what the Cavs did this offseason was trying to take away from that, trying to take away from the fact that they had guys that could be played off of the floor. I don't think they're built that way anymore. I don't think they have guys. If you go and look at their top 9 guys, I don't think they have guys that can be played off the floor. And I think that's a very, very important thing to think about. And I am just very curious how much of their offseason plan came about because of what happened in the postseason. And if they had this same exact team that they have right now, so you add in Lonzo Ball, you add in Larry Nance, you subtract Ty Jerome, you subtract Isaac Okoro, but you keep all the injuries the Cavs had in the postseason last year. Do they get by the Pacers? Probably not, but I think it looks different. I think it looks a little bit different than it does. I don't think it's a 5-game series. I think that they probably push that series to 6 or 7, and they may not have had enough still because of the injuries, but I just think it looks different. And I think the fact that the Cavs now look different, I think they can play with a few different identities that they didn't necessarily have the ability to totally tap into all of the time last year. I think that's a really important thing. And I think that's a real bright spot about what this offseason changed for the Cavs. So hearing about how much their postseason experience, both with themselves and watching the two teams that played for the championship, impacted what they did this summer. And I don't know how much they will be willing to reveal there, but I do look at that and say, yeah, that'll be an interesting thing to learn. That's an interesting thing to look at and just say, how much did that impact what the current Cleveland Cavaliers are? One of the other things that sort of goes along with that is how different do they expect to look? I mentioned some of the different identities that the Cavs could have, and they are a team that for as long as I have been covering them, and at some points it's been true, at other points it has not been as true. But since I've been covering them, they have always said we are a defense first team. That goes back to Donovan Mitchell's first year in Cleveland. That was the first year I was like really, truly on the Cavs beat. They've always said they were a defense first team. And Donovan's first year in Cleveland, they were a defense first team. They finished with the best defensive rating in the NBA. They were the best defensive team from start to finish, and they came up short in the postseason because they couldn't score enough. The second year, there were so many injuries that impacted things. Like, they were respectable, no doubt. They were not top of the league defensively the way that they were before. They were 7th, which is a very, very fine place to be. Like, considering the fact that Evan Mobley missed as much time as he did, the Cavs finishing 7th defensively in 23-24, very respectable result. And then you get to last year, and the Cavs finished with the number 8 defense last year. Now, part of that is some end of the season numbers that are just a little bit different. And like, all of those things count. But I do think that they have not been last year, for as much as they want to talk about it, they were not a defense first team last year. And I don't know that they're going to be a defense first team this year. I think that offensively, they should be just as good, if not a little bit better. And we're talking about the team that last year was the number 1 offense in basketball by a rather significant margin. They had an offensive rating of 121. Boston had the second best offense at 119.5. So like, that's not nothing. That's not a small gap. That is a bigger gap between 1 and 2 than where the Celtics were at 2 and the Denver Nuggets were at 4. That's a significant gap. And I don't know if they're going to have the number 1 offense in basketball. I think that there are going to be some growing pains because this team does look different. But I think one of the identities they can tap into more is, I do think that there are certain lineups that the Cavs can go to, that Kenny Atkinson can go to, where they should be much better defensively. And I think for this year, if the Cavs as constructed, and health is a big issue here, but it's a big qualifier for just about everybody. Like, you can look at any team other than Oklahoma City right now, I think, and say, Well, if those two guys get hurt, they'll fall apart defensively. OKC, just like everyone's great defensively, so I think that they're kind of the exception to this rule. But if the Cavs have a couple of injuries, they will have a backslide defensively. And I think that's true, like I said, for everybody other than Oklahoma City. But I think that this year, they have the personnel to tap into a much greater defensive identity. And I do think that anything outside of the top 5 defensively should be looked at as a shortcoming for them. Offensively, it's the same. And when you are a championship caliber team, I believe that you should be top 5, both offensively and defensively. I think the Cavs have the roster to do it. And I think that that is one of the things that is different about this year is that they can tap into a defensive identity a little bit more than they could in years past. I think that's a very, very important thing. Now, the Cavs got better because of some moves, but ultimately, how much better do they expect to get because of internal growth? We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for a kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Yeah, NFL season is here. You know why it's finally actually here? It's been going on for 3 weeks, but it's finally here now because the Cleveland Browns won. That's right. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your first $5 bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Maybe you heard me talk about this last week, and I hope you didn't hear me talk about this last week. And you bet that $5 on the Cleveland Browns. Now, I would not expect you to bet that $5 on the Cleveland Browns on the money line because that would have been a big risk. You want to have a bet that you feel comfortable with trying to get that $300 in bonus bets. But maybe you bet the Browns plus 7.5. And boy, if you did, you are happy because the Cleveland Browns not only covered that spread, but they won on the money line. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com to get started. Place your first $5 bet. And if that first $5 bet hits, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Again, download the FanDuel app today or head to FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first watch today and every day. You can find the show on YouTube. And if you are watching along, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest from us here at Locked On Cavs. And I think what might be the most important question that I can almost guarantee you the way it's going to be answered is, where do you guys expect internal developments to come from with this team? The Cavs, I think, got better externally, but those things don't matter if they don't get better internally as well, and better internally to a different standard. And I think the answer to how do the Cavs get better internally is on one guy, and I think it's Evan Mobley. And it's not to say that other players don't need to improve. Darius Garland needs to keep getting better. I think Donovan Mitchell is going to be better this season than he was last season. I think Jared Allen can still get a little bit better, maybe not that much. I think other guys like DeAndre Hunter in his second year, having a full offseason, having a full training camp in Cleveland can be better than he was last year. In some areas, I wouldn't expect him to shoot better from beyond the arc than he did last year, but I think he can still be a better overall player. I think Jalen Tyson can improve. But ultimately, so much for this team is on the shoulders of Evan Mobley, because Evan Mobley is without a doubt the guy on the roster for the Cavs that has the highest ceiling. He is the one that can be a perennial first-team All-NBA player. He can be a perennial MVP candidate. He is the one that can ascend to a true franchise icon. And I think Donovan Mitchell is there, but Evan Mobley can be there for longer than Donovan will be, because Donovan didn't make his first All-NBA team, first-team All-NBA team until he was 28 years old, which was last season. And maybe Donovan does it again this year. I don't know. But I think Evan's going to do that. He's going to reach that goal before he's 28. I think that he's going to have a very long runway as the franchise's best player. And I don't anticipate him to be the best player on the Cavs this year. I think that maybe that conversation begins next year. But I do think there's a closer gap between he and Donovan Mitchell this upcoming season. And one of the things that I'm most interested in when this question gets asked is, what ways is Evan Mobley expected to be better this season than he was last season? Because there's a very clear thing for me offensively. I think if you tighten up his handle, he instantly becomes a better basketball player. But I am curious what Koby Altman and Kenny Atkinson have to say about that. I'm very interested in hearing what ways they think Evan Mobley can improve. Is it getting stronger? Is it becoming an even better three-point shooter? Is it a number of other things that he can do? Because there are a lot of areas where he can grow. But I look at tightening up that handle and think, you know what, that might just be the most important one. That might be the one that unlocks a lot of different things for his game. Now, that's going to do it for today's episode. I know this is a little bit shorter than usual, but going to have an episode later on Tuesday. I'm planning on getting this out Tuesday afternoon after Koby and Kenny talk. So you're going to want to make sure, if you're on YouTube, make sure you have that notification bell clicked so that you don't miss that. But I'm going to go over everything they say. We're going to talk about the important stuff, maybe the not quite as important stuff, but that is what the Wednesday show that's really going to come out on Tuesday afternoon is going to be all about. So make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. And like I said, hit that notification bell, because if you do that, you will know exactly when the very next episode of Locked on Cavs is coming your way. So thank you again for making this show your first listen today. Make the next show your second listen today, or your first listen tomorrow, whatever works for you. That's the best thing that you can do. And thanks for hanging out with me today on Locked on Cavs. I'll be back a little bit later or tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.